The Second World War fascinates people to a great deal, but why is that? Well, partially this is due to the fact that it can be explained as a conflict of good versus evil. A story of an evil empire that extended its claws and caused the suffering of millions, but was then defeated by the noble democratic nations who would never resort to the methods of its adversary. Well, welcome to Dresden. This city was bombed severely in 1945 and over 25,000 civilians perished in this. Why was Dresden bombed? Why is it bombing so well known? And why was it so particularly cruel? That's what you will find out today, because in this video I'm going to talk about the bombing of Dresden. Stay tuned. Good to have you back on the channel, and I'm here on location in the city of Dresden. Behind me you can see the reconstructed old town. Yes, this was all bombed flat in 1945. To discuss this bombing, we first need to talk about terror bombing in general, because Nazi Germany started doing this already before the outbreak of the Second World War. Yes, during the Spanish Civil War, the Luftwaffe bombed the Spanish city of Guernica, and many Spanish civilians perished in this. When the Germans invaded Poland, and thus the Second World War began, the Germans bombed the town of Wilung. They dropped 46,000 kilograms of bombs on this Polish town, and thousands of Polish civilians perished. But this was only the beginning. Terror bombing and strafing were a common phenomenon during this brutal invasion. Also, the capital of Warsaw suffered a great ordeal and lost many of its precious buildings and Polish civilians by the terror bombing of the German Luftwaffe. And as the war progressed, the Luftwaffe bombed many other cities such as Rotterdam, London, Coventry, and countless of cities on the Eastern Front. Arthur Bomber Harris had presided over the campaign to destroy German cities since 1942. Northern and western cities, most easily reachable from British bases, had been the first to be targeted. By 1943, British nighttime area bombing was linked to daytime American so-called precision raids, often in fact considerably less than precise, as the severity of the attacks grew in the proclaimed strategy of round-the-clock bombing. In July 1943, over 40,000 German civilians perished in the bombing of Hamburg. Cities in the Rhine-Ruhr area were also constantly targeted for Allied bombing campaigns. And as the Luftwaffe lost more and more of its effectiveness, the Allies gained superiority in the air, and also because their bases were now closely located to Germany, the bombing campaigns intensified. Berlin suffered 363 air raids during the Second World War, and these attacks were often directed at city centers with a disregard of the civilian population and cultural heritage. The bombing of Dresden, which happened February 13th and 14th, 1945, can be seen as a special case. It was considered as a jewel on the Elbe, the Florence on the Elbe, with its beautiful architectural and cultural heritage. Arthur Harris thought it was necessary to bomb Dresden because it functioned as a hub for troop transfer to the Eastern Front. The city was a vulnerable target. There were perfect conditions for complete aerial annihilation, good weather for bombing, the almost total absence of air defenses, the lack of provision by the Nazi leadership of even semi-adequate air raid shelters, and a city overcrowded by the accommodation of thousands of refugees to add to the population of 640,000.
February at dusk, RAF Lancasters wing their way toward Dresden in a massive blow involving more than 800 heavy bombers. A new type German Scarecrow bomb explodes in mid-air, simulating a direct hit on a bomber. Pathfinder flares and incendiaries mark the immediate targets.
British incendiary bombs caused a firestorm which was fueled by the subsequent American air raid. People who took cover in their shelters, they suffocated, and those on the streets were dragged in the firestorm to be incinerated. In the narrow streets of the city center, fires from buildings on either side searching for oxygen merged in the center, creating a ceiling of flames. It began to move toward the ground. The fire from the 4th, 3rd, 2nd and ground floors joined in the center of the street. Still looking for oxygen, the flames moved through the streets at breathtaking speed. Many people jumped into the big water reservoir of the city, and as a result of this, drowned. Survival was a matter of pure luck. Dresden had transformed into a city of the dead. Charred corpses lay everywhere. The railway center that was packed with refugees that fled from the eastern German provinces was now packed with corpses. An estimated 25,000 Germans had perished in the brutal inferno. However, for a very few, the bombing brought salvation. The remaining Jews of the city had been awaiting their imminent deportation and were aware of what that meant. In the chaos, they were able to rip off their yellow star, join the homeless Aryan masses, and avoid deportations to their death. However, the Nazi regime was under immense pressure. They managed to set up emergency aid. 2,008 workers and several thousand POWs were sent to the area in order to help those who survived. Within a few days, over 100,000 hot meals were distributed. The charcoal bodies were collected and counted. Over 10,000 were buried in mass graves on the outskirts of the city. Thousands more were cremated late February, early March on the Altmarkt of the city center. For Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, the bombing was a gift. He spoke to the German people of the Allied terror bombing of the cultural heritage of Dresden, in which 250,000 people have died. In reality, he had inflated the number by a tenfold. Furthermore, the claim that Dresden was a city without war industries isn't correct, because the industries around the city were also aimed at war production. The railway junction was an important hub for troop transfer to the Eastern Front. However, the railway station might have been targeted. The industries outside the cities were not. After the bombing of Dresden, the Allies raised questions about the legitimacy of these bombing campaigns. Estimates of the number of German civilians killed vary, but it was around 500,000 people. The Luftwaffe had killed many more, including an estimated 500,000 civilians in the Soviet Union alone. But that is still no excuse for Harris' utterly wrong-headed conviction that Bomber Command could win the war on its own, simply by smashing cities. Dresden is beautifully rebuilt. It looks very nice, but does it have its old charm? I don't think so. If you want to know more about the territorial evolution of Germany in the 20th century, you can click right here. Thank you so much for watching, and please consider becoming a patron, because with your donations I can keep doing this and expand. Cheers from Dresden.